Good morning, YouTubers. Hope everyone's doing good. It's Wednesday morning around like 10 o'clock. So, yeah, like I've been saying, I've been down this great path lately. I've been in September. I went down to Bull Moose a few times. It's been awesome. I've been I've bought a whole bunch of movies lately, so it's been a lot of fun and some stuff I've seen. Most of the stuff I haven't seen, I had not seen before. So yeah, amazing. So I've been working my way through this whole stack of movies. I still have another stack to go, and it's just a world of fun. Um, I just finished up two movies last night, and the movie that I'm going to be covering today, Satan's Cheerleaders, amazing. I finished that up last night, and then I also watched, which I had never seen. I'd always heard about. Huge David Cronenberg fan. He was one of those guys, Canadian, real famous Canadian director. But that's kind of where the term for horror film in horror films, where the term body horror came from. He kind of invented his own genre. But I got this movie of his called Shivers, which was the first movie he ever made, and it was from 1975, and I was just blown away by it. Never seen it. I'm a huge Cronenberg fan, so I'm going to be doing a show on that soon. So yeah, before I get into the movie discussion, I want to thank everybody for checking out the page. It's been growing a little bit more. So I've been, got some new things coming up. This weekend, I'm going to be doing an interview with a really great friend, my friend Emmett Layler, who is a really awesome musician in the area. I play in a band with him called Split Willow, and I've known Emmett for, he just turned 30, so I've known him since he was like a little baby, pretty much. I used to work in this restaurant called Fitzpatrick's back in the day when I was, you know, fresh out of school. I went to Berkeley College of Music, and I went through this tough period of where I wasn't sure where I was gonna end up. I kind of knew, like, the whole Berkeley experience when I went there was one of the hardest things I ever went through, but then also one of the greatest things I ever went through. It was definitely two two incredible different sides going on all the time. Like this juxtaposition of where it was like overwhelming, completely disorienting, but yet after I kind of got my bearings to a degree, I was able to get into this space of where I became like this human sponge, and I just tried to soak up everything, even if things were well, it was the case when I was there, but mostly everything at the time, all the new information I was getting was so over my head. So I just, went with it, and I just tried to soak up everything as much as I could. But, and it's a thing that musicians do, and anybody in the arts. It's like you want to, try to, in this idealistic sense, you want to, if you can make your living off of what you do and what you're excited and passionate about, that's really what that's I think everybody kind of wants that. But particularly people in the arts, you really want to find a way where you could maybe make your sole source of income off of that. But then a lot of the times, the reality of the situation, in the real world application, it hits you hard, of where it's incredibly tough to do that, as all artists know. I mean, most artists and musicians that I know, and they have, such incredible talent, they could do anything. And musicians that I am very fortunate to play with, in the musicians that I've played with in the past, and then musicians that I play with now, just phenomenal talents. And I always have this. There was recently a drummer I just met, this guy Benjamin, who is a really great drummer that I saw months ago, and he just recently moved to the area. And one of the discussions we talked about was just how we live in this like small area, the small kind of mid-coast, kind of rural area, but there's so much great art. There's so much great music. There's so many great musicians in the area. So there's like a wealth of, of all of this talent, and it's, really, really feel fortunate to have that. But the thing is, a lot of musicians, most of the musicians that I know, all have, quote unquote, like a day job where that's where they kind of pay their bills, or, and what have you. Whereas like this music thing, they do on the weekends or during the week or at night, and they can, get paid for those gigs or for those shows. But it's always a dilemma of where we live, where it's very seasonal, and usually like from the springtime till about the fall, things can be going like gangbusters as far as like work that there is for musicians. And I noticed that especially this summer, there's been definitely an increase of those kinds of things, which is awesome and tremendous. But things, get pretty quiet as far as gig opportunities and whatnot once the fall hits. Even though there are still lots of things going on. So if there was a thing of where we had, I definitely think if it was like not so seasonal, I think musicians would probably have a little bit of an easier time being able to sustain it and perhaps make an income solely off of that. And the other thing that happens, which I've talked about before, is, and I feel like it's gotten better, but one thing I've talked about before is, musicians who are active and performing, at various places throughout the year. To me, I break it down to this thing, and I remember being this real big, well, I guess to a degree, like a hot button issue, where musicians were feeling like they were not being treated fairly, as far as taken seriously for their talent, and then also getting paid for their services. And it's made me really think a lot as far as trying to look at it, the trade aspect, for what it is. Because essentially, aside from like the artistic thing or and the idea of like the actual performance and what have you, essentially if you break down what a musician does, it's essentially like they're providing a service. And I remember talking about that a lot, and it was a big discussion a while back with a lot of people and musicians in the area, and how it's not really taken that seriously by maybe certain businesses or people in general. I think it's changed, and I think it's gotten better, but I kind of broke it down after like thinking about it a while, for a long time, where it's like this kind of the scenario of like, if your car breaks down, you're gonna have to take your car to a mechanic, or say you need insulation or windows put into your house, or your plumbing goes in your house and you need to get that fixed, or and what have you, all those kinds of scenarios. Or you're looking for somebody to paint your house. You need something where you can paint your house. So you will usually contact a company or an individual who has a company or who has a trade, a person who let's say for instance a mechanic, who their specific trade is working on cars. And for myself, I have no idea about how those things work. So the idea of like getting a specialist who's trained in those things to provide them, and then you pay those people for their services because what they do is a special, is a special trade. And not everybody can be a mechanic. Not everybody's necessarily a good mechanic, but it's a job or a talent that requires a skill set, to a degree experience. And when you're hiring people like that for those kinds of things, they're providing a service. And also the other thing is it's a service you need, and it's a service that you really without you can't really function too well. You're going to be limited to what you can do and whatnot. And I looked at musicians in that I feel like what musicians do, the same exact thing. It's like people get married or people have parties. Businesses have openings, like grand openings, or you have special events, all kinds of things. Even people who are music therapists, and so you essentially do the same thing where you hire those people, or hopefully hire those people to provide a service that is also a specialty trade. Not everybody is trained to be a musician or is necessarily that great at it, but there are people who it's their thing. They provide a service. It's an integral part of your of who you are, and it's also something that you need to carry on, and it's a service. So you'll pay those people accordingly, and you should. But a lot of the times in the past, not so much again, like I said, I think it's gotten better. But a lot of the times, people in the outside realm of say the music world don't equate those two to be equal as far as like what a musician does and where they are a tradesman and they're providing a service. They don't equate that to being the same thing as like if you hire a painter or a plumber or a carpenter or what have you. It always the idea of musicians, the idea of like a gigging musician, I think from people on the outside, they look at it, they don't take it as seriously. They feel like it's this thing of where, well, it's just a bunch of dudes or girls hanging out. What they do isn't work. They're just partying. They're drinking, alcohol. They take drugs. They sleep in late. They're slackers. It's not a real job. It doesn't really require anything. It's just people kind of getting together and and where they make noise and they jam, but it's not really, and it's just fun. It's not work. So they kind of equate it as this thing of where, well, it's not, they don't take it seriously like a trade. And I know like there are stereotypes of musicians, and stereotypes exist because there's always a kernel of truth behind it. But if you look at it for face value, it's like musicians are, they are providing a service that is needed, and they're using their skill set to provide that service, so they need to get paid accordingly. It's the same scenario of where if you had a painter come over to your house and they did this whole project, and at the end of their project where the job was concluded, you're not going to try to do this thing of where you'll be like, well, you might have agreed on a price, and you're not going to go into this thing of, well, maybe something came up and, I'm going to pay you a little bit less, or maybe instead of paying you, I'll buy you a beer, or I'll make you a cheeseburger, or maybe I can just pay you like later at some time and I'll let you know. In that regard, as far as like how painters are treated and carpenters, blah blah blah, that would be unheard of. You would never ever do that. You would never. That would be something that wouldn't even be part of the equation. You would pay that person immediately on an agreed fee for their services. And in the past, I feel like musicians have been treated that way, of where, because it's not taken seriously or regarded as the same thing as a service and trade like these other jobs that I mentioned. It has this thing of where they can kind of slide that and not take them seriously and be like, well, I'll give you a tip instead, or I'll buy you a free meal, or I'll get back to you, and I'll sort it out and then I'll pay you. It needs to be a thing of where, no, you're providing a service, and so you need to get paid a certain amount, and that's really it. But what I've seen in the last few years, especially the last 2 years, it seems to have moved more in that direction, as far as business owners and people in general kind of looking at musicians in a little bit of a different light and realizing that it is a really valuable and important service, and a service that's needed for people. And I think in some ways more so than a lot of other things. But they're all equal in the way that they are. It's a trade that someone is providing. They're a professional. You're hiring for them to do something for you. So I feel like that's changed a little bit. I don't think in the big picture or the big scheme of things it will ever be taken as seriously, but I think it's definitely. I feel and what I've seen, that there has been that change or shift, which has been great. And that being said, about musicians not being able to make a living, I have come in contact with quite a few people and know of a few people that actually, are able to make a living doing their job. And again, it's comes back to the same thing. If somebody starts a painting business, they either maybe hire other people, like subcontract people out, or they work for themselves, or they hire a little crew. But they're able to make a living off of doing their own business. And the same thing can happen for musicians. So it's that same kind of idea. The only reason that doesn't happen across the boards is, I think, because of that same dilemma of where musicians are not quite taken seriously. So, but I think it's been a positive step in that direction the last few years, at least how I've seen it, as far as just the scenario of where someone is hired for a job and they get paid for their services, and there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You're providing that service. And I've seen that there's been more, like, it feels like it's been more done. It's been done in a lot more of a respectful way, which has been great. I think in much more of a positive. It's swung more in a much more positive direction. But anyway, so this brings me to this movie. This movie, which I'm going to talk about today, is called Satan's Cheerleaders. And this is a movie, I definitely never seen it. And this was a movie I heard a lot about for a long, long time. There's a couple of guys that I like that I've always mentioned on YouTube, and I've always been fascinated by this movie. One guy in particular, who actually he does mostly like a music show, and most of the show is dedicated towards, it's mostly dedicated to metal and death metal stuff, but he does all vinyl. But he does some specialty shows where he'll talk about soundtracks and film scores, and he'll talk about his vinyl collection. But one of the movies that he talked a lot about was Satan's Cheerleaders. This movie came out in the 70s, and it's completely outrageous. it's basically centered on this thing of where these high school girls are they're tried there's this whole scenario where there's like this in this town where there's like these supposed people who are Satanists or involved with the occult. They try to bring these women in into these high school girls as for this for these elaborate rituals of where they're gonna sacrifice them for the Dark Lord. But while this whole thing is happening over where they're trying to seduce and bring in these girls, they realize that these girls are actually in league with the devil himself and are actually very powerful, and that the group that's initially trying to bring them in to sacrifice them, they're actually just a bunch of like charlatans, and the cheerleaders are actually in league with the devil himself. And it's really interesting. It's super campy. It's super cheesy. The music is amazing. It's a little bit more. And again, like I said, I've heard a lot about this film. I've never seen it before. And the thing about it is, it's a little bit more campy than I thought. But it's great. I mean, the music is great. It's got all this great like '70s funk kind of stuff, and it's a super fun movie. And it's super weird at the same time. And it totally is one of those films that lives up to the title of the movie. And I feel like this is a perfect movie to like watch, during the Halloween season. And it stars John Carradine, which is I was really amazed that he was in this. I thought that was super cool. It was directed by Graydon Clark, who was a pretty well-known director during this whole time of that, in the exploitation world. I watched a documentary. I think it's on. Yeah, it's on the Blu-ray that I have for the another amazing exploitation classic called Pieces. And there's a really awesome documentary on there where they talked about the whole scene in New York in the 70s and 80s in New York on 42nd Street, back when it was, a grindhouse mecca. And they showed there was, multiple movie theaters, and they showed all these sleazy exploitation movies constantly, and it was just like this crazy, amazing period for all these films. But there's an interview with the director on in this documentary, Graydon Clark, and it's super interesting because he, it's one of those things of where, he was there during that time of where they were showing all of these sleazy movies, and there was, just it was a world of wonder, and a lot of these films would just after their runs for a few weeks they would just kind of disappear into obscurity, but. And it was definitely a special period, and it would have been a great period to have been a part of, But this is a primetime movie from that world, Satan's Cheerleaders. It's a beautiful package. The artwork is amazing. Unfortunately, it just has It just only has commentary tracks, but it's got a Blu-ray and a DVD version. But the restoration is really amazing. And I got this really, really cheap. And I'm so psyched that I finally got this and have finally seen it. And now I'm looking forward to watching it again. So if you get a chance, definitely check this out. Satan's Cheerleaders. It's a classic 70s grindhouse movie that is super entertaining. I think it's a great movie. Being that we're kind of in the Halloween season, it's a really great addition for movie watching during the Halloween season. It's kind of it's more of a party movie too. It's light and goofy and silly and doofy, but it's also pretty messed up, and it's got definitely it has the horror elements. One of the reviews on here is it basically says what was one of the reviews? They kind of compared it to fun. Well, one of the blurbs of it is it says it's funnier than The Omen and scarier than the silent movie. And that's a good scenario where like The Omen, which is a classic, you know, is a pretty serious movie, but this is like a really silly kind of farce of a movie in comparison, but it has a lot of those elements. Awesome movie, Saints Cheerleaders. Gotta check it out. So this is Jason Dean. I'm gonna be signing off here. If you get a chance, like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. And thanks again. And we will see you next time. Peace.